2,211 categories down, and we're ranking the best drivers of 2020. Hello, my name is Alex Does F1 Stuff, and welcome finally to the end of this post-season mini-series. It has been 4 weeks. This will be week number 5, actually, when I upload this video, and we have looked at 2,211 separate individual categories, ranked each driver accordingly, and therefore have decided the overall order for the best drivers of this year. So if you have not seen those videos, I'll pop a little playlist to that in the corner so you can go and watch that. But I'll just be giving a little recap of the overall order for each of the 4 main categories that we have looked at so far this season. Series. So without further ado, let's jump straight on in. Quantifying the best driver of the 2020 season from 4 main categories. We jump on in to category number 1, and that was qualifying. Comparing qualifying against your teammate and your own individual performances, looking at 7 mini categories. We came up with an order that looked a bit like this. Max Verstappen leading George Russell. Kevin Magnussen was declared the 3rd best qualifier of the year. From Lewis Hamilton, Romain Grosjean, Giovinazzi actually popped himself inside the top 10. Then Ricciardo, Leclerc, Gasly and Raikkonen shared an 8.83. Then Latifi, Bottas, Norris, Perez, Sainz, Ocon, Kvyat, Vettel, Albon and Stroll at the back. And so after just category number 1, the qualifying results, the best driver of 2020 looks a little bit like this. Max Verstappen leads George Russell and so on and so forth. Exactly the same order, we just have one average so far, with Gasly and Raikkonen sharing position 9. And so we jump on in to category number 2, and this time we did exactly the same with qualifying. Instead we looked at the races. We looked at your own individual race performance and performances against your teammates, comparing against 8 different categories this time. And we came up with an order for the races that looked a bit like this. Max Verstappen led Lewis Hamilton, equal with Sergio Perez, and just behind that was Kimi Raikkonen. Then came the 2 Hasses, then Ricciardo, Gasly, Russell, Leclerc, Sainz, Giovinazzi, Latifi, Vettel, Norris, Stroll, Ocon, Kvyat, and Bottas and Albon were all the way at the back of the races category. And so after 2 main categories, we have an overall average after round number 2 that looks a little bit like this. Max Verstappen still leading the best driver of 2020, Lewis Hamilton now P2 from Magnussen, Russell and Grosjean are sharing a 5.5 ranking, then it's Raikkonen, Ricciardo, Gasly, Perez, Leclerc, Giovinazzi, Latifi, Sainz and Norris are down that order there, then Bottas, Vettel, Ocon, Kvyat, Stroll and Albon. And then category number 3, the practice to qualifying progression. This is where we kicked it up a little bit. We went from looking at 7 categories in qualifying, we went to 8 in the races, and this one, category number 3, we jumped to 221 individual categories. And so we came up with an order that looked a little bit like this. Once again, Max Verstappen leading this main category, from Lewis Hamilton, from Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, Bottas, Ricciardo, Sainz, Gasly, Russell, Perez, also very close inside the top 10. Then a little bit of a jump down to outside of the top 10 with Stroll, Ocon, Raikkonen, Magnussen, Albon moving away from the back end of the field. Then Kvyat, Vettel, Grosjean, Giovinazzi and Latifi rounded this field off. Which means averaging out these 3 main categories, we have an order that looks a little bit like this. Max Verstappen is still the best driver of 2020 so far, but there is still 1 category left. Lewis Hamilton closing in on that gap, but they are leaps and bounds above Daniel Ricciardo, now P3, with George Russell 4th, then Magnussen, Leclerc, Gasly, Perez, Raikkonen, Grosjean. The 2 McLarens are slowly moving forward in that order. Bottas, Giovinazzi, Latifi, Ocon, Stroll, Vettel, Kvyat, and Albon still at the back. And then we went on into the final category, the race progression. And if you thought 221 categories was a lot, this one we looked at 1,975 individual categories, the majority of which, roughly 2/3 of those, looked at your own individual performances, and then 1/3 of those were looking at performances compared to your teammates. So there is little bias towards teammates with large deltas. Picture Verstappen and Albon, Hamilton and Bottas, etc., etc. It mainly focuses on your individual performances throughout this year. And so the order for category number 4, race progression, looked a bit like this. Max Verstappen leading. It is 4 categories from 4 for Max Verstappen this year. Lewis Hamilton once again P2, George Russell P3, closely followed by Stroll, Ricciardo, Sainz, Magnussen, Leclerc, Gasly and Bottas. There is only less than a point's difference between those 7 drivers in the race progression category. Then there's Perez, Giovinazzi, Norris, Grosjean, Ocon, Latifi, Albon, Kvyat, Raikkonen, and then a small jump towards Vettel in this category. Which means averaging these 4 results, we have the best drivers of 2020 ranked. Max Verstappen, overall the best driver of 2020. Lewis Hamilton in P2, then a big jump to George Russell in P3 in the Williams, closely followed by Daniel Ricciardo. Magnussen is P5 as well for Haas, just ahead of Charles Leclerc, who is ahead of Pierre Gasly, Sergio Perez, Carlos Sainz, Romain Grosjean. Then just outside the top 10 are Norris, Raikkonen, Bottas, Giovinazzi, Stroll. Then we have another big step to Latifi and Ocon joint on 15, and then we have another pair joint on 17.25, Kvyat and Vettel, with Albon just half a point down at the back end of this field. And there we go, that is your list after 2,211 individual categories, with the majority of those focusing on your own individual performances, disregarding those against your teammate. It looked at how well you performed as a driver, and then of course we had to look at how well you did against your teammate. That had to come into this. So roughly it was a split of about 2/3 to 1/3, but if you do want to go and have a look at exactly how each of these categories orders were broken down, I have 4 separate individual videos for all of those, along with a nice little playlist. I'll probably dot them throughout this video in the information cards as well. But most importantly, do you agree with this order? No opinions came into this. Obviously a small little opinion in exactly what categories I chose, but I tried to be as fair as I could, getting a nice broad range of all the individual categories possible. Any sort of data point I could come up with that I could apply to the whole grid, I gave a ranking to them. So do you agree with what my maths has pulled up with this order? Let me know down in the comments below. But that is all I've got for you today, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next episode with whatever and whenever I decide to make it. I'll see you guys then.